My name is Emily Morgan McClain, and I serve as a psychotherapist in private practice who also does what they call biofeedback and neurofeedback.
So can you talk a little bit about your profession?
I see young children, 3-year-old and up, so I have what they call a registered play therapy training certification. So you actually utilize play therapy because play is their talk and their work. And I also see teens as well as couples and individual adults. Then I also see a lot of people who deal with anxiety and or depression, and talk therapy and or medications no longer working for them or not a viable option from their point of view. So that's when we would utilize the biofeedback, which might include something like heart rate variability, temperature, lots of different things to help control their stress. And then neurofeedback is essentially biofeedback with the brain. And so many times with someone's feeling anxious, there's some imbalances going on that you actually can train the brain, kind of like a workout. And the more you exercise it, the more it attunes itself to get more balanced. So I will utilize that modality when needed. Some people have also gone through pretty severe trauma, and so talking about their trauma actually is more re-traumatizing. So doing something like the biofeedback and neurofeedback that affects more of their body rather than talking about it has proven to be more effective at times.
Now, you've said previously to me that you can do brain training with people while watching TV shows or movies. Can you explain the logistics of how this actually trains the brain?
Okay. Yes, some people choose to do, especially you can imagine teens, they might prefer to do something like watching TV during their, what they call the brain training or EEG training. There's lots of different names for it, but neurofeedback, we'll say. So you actually are attaching sensors to their head as well as grounding it. And it is producing the electrical energy on the brain. And so it just picks that up and kind of tells you where they are on different hemispheres. So when they come in, you, quote, hook them up, and then they can choose within reason what type of show they might want to watch. This is typically younger people and teens that they prefer to do this type to maintain their attention. And when they are hooked up and I'm utilizing software, I'm utilizing a statistics program, obviously very complex, to come up with what their appropriate protocol would be. So then they would get to choose something that, again, ideally is not anything anxiety inducing, anything depressing, a rather benign show. And when everything is hooked up, the software allows the screen, if they are going out of the perimeters that I've set for them, so if they have ADHD and I'm focusing on their focus or lack thereof, I would have the perimeters of my protocol set to where if they start to daydream, the screen of the movie that they're watching will start to dim. You can also have it where the sound, the audio also changes. So it subtly shows and tells the brain that they're not paying attention in that moment. But it's all somewhat of a meta communication. They are not needing to try to do anything, and I'm not needing to tell them, because essentially your brain innately wants the screen to stay the same. So when it starts altering, there's the mild little bit of, frustration and putting the guardrails on because it's trying to get the screen lightness and audio back into where you've set the perimeters.
How does the show choice affect the person and how their brain reacts?
Okay. If someone, I never know how a particular show is going to affect someone. I just have to watch what they call the trend screen. What is going on with their brain waves? Because that's essentially what we're watching is the currents that are going on in their brain. And there's certain ones, as different as every brain responds and is, there is a very exact science about ideally how the brain waves should be layering, we'll say, in the brain. So I utilize it where I'm usually looking at where their beta brain waves are, which is often what people would call of like attached to more anxiety or intensity, versus alpha is a little bit more it is more about like someone's well-being. But if it's not very high, often it can be indicators more of like what we would call depression, symptoms with depression. So I could take sometimes the same show and two people, same age, same gender, same sex, and they have a completely different response to that. But however, I usually know that like a rated R show that's like a horror show would have not, it would raise their what they call the beta, the anxiety, and that is not what I'm trying to do typically. So but I have, there's a couple examples. So like, a lot of times I have teens pick Disney movies because that takes them back to their childhood, helps them relax, feel safe in my environment, and really lets their brain, quote, work out while they're in my office. So that's one thing I know many times can be a go-to. But of course, you can have the child that maybe their parents screamed at them during the Disney movies at home, so it could elicit that beta brainwave to go up. But I've also had people watch something like the teen who watches The Office and watches it kind of every night to almost go to bed. And then they're in my office and they're not realizing it, but though the show is hilarious, the snarkiness that the cast members are having to play, which is funny, it's actually raising their anxiety unbeknownst to them. But then they get to actually see it on the screen, how their brain's reacting. That actually you waiting for the next jab is actually increasing your anxiety a little bit. This might not be an ideal show to watch. Maybe watch a Disney show or something lighter. I've also had someone who is extremely interested in becoming like a forensic, like the FBI type person, examiner. And I never watch personally CSI or any of those types of crime shows because I find them unnecessary anxiety. But they really requested to watch that. And I thought, well, this will be great. I'll show them this is going to be a disaster. And again, with her, because she wanted that to be her major and she was extremely interested in it, there was actually a relaxing component and she was able to focus. Unlike if I would have put a Disney movie on, she probably would have started to daydream and not really pay attention. So technology and which ones I'm choosing does make a difference. And it really depends on what I'm trying to work on with that person is how I choose the one. And many times we have to go through several. Some it's better to have a benign, more education one, to just start with a baseline.
With neurofeedback and biofeedback, have you been able to see the effects of technology use in people?
Oh, yes. I work with a lot of teens and college age, and they have been using technology to the level for a long time. They're, the first generation that have lived with it their whole life. So many of them are going to bed with it, getting up with it. And I have been at this since like 95. So you can see the changes, and neurologists are seeing the changes in the brain. there's no doubt that so many children are being diagnosed with ADHD and having attention issues when it is essentially they have not ever, allowed their brain to regulate. So technology, when you're going to bed and having blue screen in your eyes right before bed, well, we've got sleep disruption. And then it's just a trickle down from then. It's like if you're not sleeping well and not sleeping enough hours and not sleeping through the hours, then you're going to have more than likely some anxiety. You can only be anxious for so long, so then you will eventually have some depression. And then that, a lot of times, that they start flipping from feelings of depression, tired, and lethargic to then, the deadline comes and then they get anxious again. So they're often just flipping out of anxiety and depression. But technology, there's just, again, the idea of no guardrails on it. The brain is changing in response to that. And like I said, they're already finding that in the medical community, the brains that are changing and just going to be structurally changing. There are so many benefits of technology, but compared to my practice 20 years ago, things are so different. Parent-child relationships are so different because children can essentially have a whole other life that their parents are not aware of. It's become like another job for the parents to try to manage and try to monitor if they so choose. Many of these parents are in fact working and very busy, so unfortunately don't give it their all, and their children get lost in the abyss of technology, of this whole second world going on for them, as well as the draw of the second family. As I say, when people become they get older in the teens, they start to move away from their own family and their friends become more important. Used to, those friends were either down the street or in the school that the parents would somewhat know. And now they can be in China, Japan. Your children can be influenced all over the place. And they can also be bullied. And they can also date through these. So it can be a good thing again in a positive relationship, or it can be a very damaging one. And sometimes the parents or friends or anyone who cares about that person, and this can happen with adults too, no one even knows what's going on with the person. But many people do feel like their technology is their job. They feel like if someone responds to something on a social media, that they must respond to each person. And so while it has many positive things and social aspects, it's kind of a double-edged sword. They also get very anxious about needing to respond, and then also reading into messages about how people have responded to them. So in many ways, it's given people a whole lot more to consider and potentially worry about.
Specifically, how has people's reading, memory, and cognitive skills been affected by technology that you have seen?
Well, I think the fact, one, people are spending a whole lot less time actually reading books, reading things that are more than a sentence or two. Mm-hmm. So that's a big change, because used to people would read to escape. So that's a big difference. It's few and far between that I talk to someone who's reading for leisure.
Yeah.
So that's very different, and that also then affects the focus. That if you can't stay with a book and finish it, what does that indicate? Mm-hmm. Whereas you get people who are like more in my age range, who grew up, if we want to escape and you can't afford to travel that moment, or it's not the time to travel, you pick up a book and you escape with it. And sometimes even have, a couple books going on. I'm pretty hard pressed to find young people who are reading books on top of their lots of reading for school. Reading for school is about all they can handle anymore, and that is very stressful, because in their brain, if you've been dealing, since you were young with just 4 or 5 word answers, or at the most maybe 3, Instagram posts and things as that, or Twitter, it's really difficult to maintain that focus, and they get very antsy. We've got the technology also, obviously, of gaming as well. And with most of those games, you can adjust the level of playing. So if your frustration tolerance level isn't there that day, even though maybe you played on level 3 yesterday, you can alter that and play level 2 if you want. So it is embedded in something like gaming for someone to not necessarily ever increase, like ever grow their frustration tolerance level. So we are seeing more rage and anger in people doing very impulsive things because they just don't walk it through. They don't think, if I do this, then I do that. Just because many of the technologies don't encourage that. It's a hit and go. Hit, get that adrenaline hit of posting that and saying that and go. We've got people who are saying things and doing things that they would never do in person. So just that impulsivity, lack of focus, lack of having a frustration tolerance level and maintaining it, much less growing it. Mm-hmm. And that's a lot of my work compared to, say, 20 years ago. I would not say that I dealt so much with my goals in therapy are to simply try to increase their frustration tolerance level. And so they have little tolerance for mom or dad coming in telling them to get off of their phone, get off, in whatever modality they're using it. They have, siblings have less tolerance for each other. It's just pretty much across the board. And then memory, again, it's just one of those, they're maybe not used to having to memorize things. I still know from, 45 years ago, I know my neighbors, all of my neighbors' phone numbers because I had to. That is not a need anymore. So, I often worry if my children, needed me, will they even know the phone number if they don't have their particular phone to pull up my number? So that's something I'm having to bring about, which used to just be, someone goes to first or second grade and you would hope that they know essentially their address and their parents' phone number to get in touch with, which often, of course, was just their home phone. Now with technology and no need to have that memory, they can be somewhere and need it and have literally no idea because they depend on a cell phone or technology, a chip tile or whatever their parents have, their watch or whatever they're wearing. They're depending on technology to hold that memory for them so they don't utilize theirs. So obviously it goes to say, is it that if you don't use it, do you lose it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard similar things with photos, how if someone takes a photo and in the moment, then they'll just forget about it. Because
the brain just automatically knows, well, you've got a picture there, and so it affects the memory of it. It affects the cognition of that experience versus somatically keeping it. It's kind of like your brain knows, kind of like neurofeedback. It wants to have that screen remain the same. The brain kind of knows when that click happens, I don't have to remember this in every sensation of my body anymore. I can go back to that picture eventually.
Now, with all these effects that you're seeing, do you think technology like neurofeedback and biofeedback could be the solution for solving these problems that other popular technologies have caused?
Well, I do find that it is helpful. It's helpful for people to see what's going on when they're utilizing the technology. Like I said, once I realized that, say about The Office, I've used that to my benefit. So I will have one particular population that I have might be autistic, and they can get very what we would call hyper focused on a particular show, whether that show is helpful for them or not. I had one young man who was very hyper focused on watching Titanic, as traumatizing as that movie is. It's a story that needs to be told, but wow, watch it one time, and I don't encourage you to watch it over. And this young man was watching it, pieces of it at least, several times a day. So sometimes it's like, well, rather than fight it, show them what's going on.
Yeah.
So it was very effective because he's very curious to see his brain. He's very interested in it. So I was able to utilize, because his, mother and father are just like at wit's end. They know that this is not probably a good thing. It really had him in a freaked out state. Like, why is our child so obsessed with death? And so it was very concerning to them. But just telling a child that has that level of hyper focus, no, and that they can't do it is not usually successful. It's not fun for anyone. So me being able to use neurofeedback with him and show him the trend screen, that while he's watching it, whether he actually feels it in his body that he's anxious, I could show him prior, because many times children with autism, they can either be very detached from their body, or they can actually be very attached to their body. So it can go different ways. But to let him know his brain knows best, and often maybe that blow up later in the day while he wasn't feeling stressed watching Titanic, his brain was. His brain was feeling very anxious, then depressed, and anxious again, and then depressed. And so how is that playing out the rest of the day for him? That maybe when his mom requests him to put his clean laundry up, maybe he's blowing up from the prior effects to that movie. Maybe it's bothered his tolerance to be able to tolerate that request from him. So that's a way that I'm hopeful with neurofeedback, is really I can see what's going on with them often prior to maybe it going on with them sensationally, with their senses. And so if I can show that to a young person so they can educate themselves and they determine, hey, yeah, I didn't realize it, but this really is stressing me out. Maybe I shouldn't watch that show right before bed. Maybe I should limit that. Maybe when I'm looking at this blue screen, it really is stimulating me. So it's not me really having to tell them, it's that their own brain telling them. So that's what I like about it. I utilize it myself. I have a health condition, so not really technology based, but obviously technology can affect it, where I can tell different things where my brain waves are alpha versus beta. And it tells me with my thyroid if it's going up versus down, and will tell me how to adjust my medication. It will also, when it's telling me that I'm kind of going down, so it's going more in the alpha direction and I'm somewhat, quote, tanking, many times energy-wise, I'm not feeling that yet. I'm not physically feeling that, but my brain is starting to be depleted. And so that means, boy, Emily, get off your technology. Make sure you're definitely wearing your blue light blockers at night so you will go to sleep and get the most sound sleep you can, so then you don't totally tank or go in the opposite direction. So those are ways that even I use that myself. The technology is helpful for myself, as it tells me, kind of puts my guardrails on technology, my own self, of like, hey, pull back, do not get on any technology after 9 o'clock, versus, you're okay, you can go till about 10 o'clock because your brain waves are looking okay. So it establishes that for me, so I know how effective it's been for me. So I think it can be effective for other people too. Again, I'm not an extreme person and I live in reality, so I know people aren't going to not use technology. But again, it can maybe just inform them about maybe there needs to be a waxing and waning with the technology. And if something is unknowingly stressing you out and you can then acknowledge by looking at a trend screen that it is, To me, that's the most effective thing versus me telling them or even research telling them. Sometimes that's the most effective way to go about it, is let them teach themselves, let them see their own brains and how they are impacted by technology, to the good or to the bad.
What are some strategies and habits people can bring into their lives to redefine and strengthen what technology has either numbed in their brain or just untrained?
I find that setting those parameters for themselves, now luckily a lot of these apps that people utilize on social media might have a time limit. So that's very effective, where they don't feel punished that they never are on social media. So they might set it for 20 minutes, absolutely reward yourself, get that assignment done, or the adult, get that, mow that yard, and then reward yourself with 20 minutes. So you can do those types of things. You can do things like the blue light blocking glasses, as well as the nighttime glasses. So they let you know if you get off of technology. Well, one, if you're going to be on technology, obviously I do see people that I have to just deal with the fact is they are going to be on technology right up until probably the moment they go to bed, especially if they're not doing neurofeedback, so just in counseling. So if they're just in counseling, and I know that that's a situation, then often I can at least get them to do blue light blocking glasses, which the blue light is affecting their sleep and it's engaging and stimulating their brain. That's widely known. So if I can get them to even just wear the glasses, that can be helpful. I have people who just go on a total diet where they just give it up for a period and journal during that time to remind themselves that often, this is obviously the more mature arena people, but they can often see that, wow, I had a whole lot more time with people, and I had a lot more time for the people in my life. I actually had a lot of pleasant conversations when I just totally got off of all social media. Or they go on a vacation and I ask them to mindfully maybe not take their computer. Don't check your email. Let things go to voicemail. A huge one, if I can get people to do it, that can greatly affect their life and their ease and help manage their schedule better, is if they just remove all notifications and then set up their own schedule the way we used to do it. We all walked around with the Franklin planners and we had our agenda written in writing. If you tended to keep a schedule, and they knew from 9 to 10 you did your callbacks, 10 to 11 you did this. So that eases the brain often to have that type of agenda versus kind of what I call accidentally getting bombed throughout your day. So now even well-intended parents, their child can be in college and they are going amongst they're going about their day and they're out of class and now it's time to go to the library or go outside and study. And unbeknownst to the parents are interrupting their children by texting them randomly during the day. And so they're not waiting for hey, I'll talk to you at 6:00 tonight until their young person's day is over. They're texting maybe at 2:00, maybe at 4:00. And so maybe that child or their young person just started to really focus on their work. If that child is getting notifications and receiving text, then they're taken out of their best thinking brain and they have to start all over again. So there's lots of tricks to the trade that you can do to kind of strengthen those things back up. So, and not have to give up technology, just structuring it, scheduling it a little more, not hesitating to put your phone on airplane mode, knowing that everything will be back there in an hour or two right after you get your work done. Netflix is a hard one because Netflix goes from one show to another. So even I can be very guilty of that I find a show and I'm one more show, and then you look up at the clock and you've stayed up too late again, whether I have my blue light blocking glasses on or not, because it's that automatic. So that one's a little bit harder, but for most you can just say, I'm going to watch a show and I want to stretch out this show. I really like it. So I'm going to challenge myself to make it take an entire week to get through this show, or I'm only going to watch the show on the weekends. So again, going back to the old day of scheduling things and really looking forward to that and anticipating it in a good way. But of course, only certain personality types really care about that as much. So certain personality types like to have things to look forward to, whereas other personality types don't necessarily lend themselves as well to scheduling and care as much about looking forward to things. But there are a lot of tricks of the trade like that you can do.
Thank you so much for letting me pick your brain a little bit about this.
I could go on and on, obviously. Like I said, to me, it's like the double-edged sword. Technology gives us so much, but if we're not disciplined, it can also take so much away from us without us knowing and being mindful of it.